Thank you. Thank you, everyone over there. The year was 1987. I was 7 years old. I had just returned home from school. Earlier in the day, I had taken a spelling pretest, and this would determine whether I should study the week's regular words or whether I could study the challenge words for the final test at the end of the week. I had misspelled the word salad. I spell it S-A-L-E-D. I was devastated. This was the first and would be the only spelling word that I missed for the entire year. And I still remember this error 36 years later. When I got home, my neighbor was sitting at the kitchen table having tea with my mom. She greeted me warmly, and she asked if I had a good day at school. Now, I had remained calm for the entire day thus far. "Terrible!" I screamed. "I failed my spelling test!" And I ran out of the room, hysterically crying. When I was finally able to calm down, I overheard my neighbor say to my mother, "Delane is the most stressed out second grader I've ever met." Now, it wasn't until 2010, at the age of 30, that I was finally diagnosed with autism, which by this point had led to devastating effects on my mental health. And this is a picture of me when I was little. So, what is autism? An official definition, and this is by the Autism Society. Autism is a complex, lifelong developmental disability that typically appears during childhood and can impact a person's social skills, communication, relationships, and self-regulation. Autism is defined by a certain set of behaviors and is a spectrum condition that affects people differently and to varying degrees. This is my definition. Autism is a different way of thinking and experiencing the world. I see and understand things differently. I'm a foreigner trying to live where I don't belong. I'm always trying to guess at what people really mean, and I'm carefully choosing my words because inevitable misunderstandings can be devastating. It's exhausting. Now, rewinding back to my childhood. Autism was clearly present, just not recognized. As a child, I intuitively knew that I was different, and I felt like an ugly duckling. But I learned the technique of camouflaging early on. In public, I put on a mask, and I was an actress, trying to hide my true self, trying to hide my anxieties, hide my frustrations, hide my discomfort, hide my feelings of isolation, of differentness. And it's incredibly tiresome to act all day long. And when I got home at the end of the school day, I was on the brink of a meltdown, and the tiniest comment would send me over the edge. I did my best to mimic the other kids at school because I desperately wanted to be accepted and to make friends. But I was no good at making friends. As a young child, I always hung out with the adults. And my differentness also stood out throughout elementary and high school when I became completely obsessed with certain projects and would go overboard. For example, in 6th grade, we were instructed to create a timeline with 12 important dates in history. Now, for those of you who are old enough, if you remember when the printer paper was all connected together and there were holes along the sides that you could rip off, so I was able to make a strip of paper that went the entire way across the room. And I drove my mom to tears as we spent hours going through my social studies book, writing down every important notable date in history on that paper, from the dawn of civilization to the election of the current president, and hundreds of dates in between. I reasoned that it's impossible to narrow down history to just 12 dates. And another summer, I entered a reading competition sponsored by the local library. I read dozens and dozens and dozens of books, so many that the judges called my parents up to ask if I had actually read that many books. Of course, I had, because that was all I did that summer: read and sleep and eat. As I got older, I was still no good at making friends, so I never dated, and I missed out on almost all the high school dances. I did insist that I was going to my senior prom, so I went alone without a date. I was overly perfectionistic and insisted that I always had to be the best at everything. I went to extremes and got all A's in elementary, high school, and in college. However, a need for more support became apparent as I entered adulthood, and that, along with serious mental health struggles, are what led to my eventual diagnosis. After graduating college, I set out on my own, living in my own apartment with a full-time physician assistant job and ready to embrace the adult world. But I soon discovered that trying to maintain that act full-time didn't give me adequate downtime. And that, coupled with the unpredictability in my schedule, unclear expectations, less structure and family support, and a whole host of adulting challenges, led to mental health struggles, and misunderstandings with my boss led to termination from my first PA job. And then my next job ended abruptly as well, and I was unable to continue working in my chosen profession. I was in and out of Western Psychiatric multiple times, but I was so good at camouflaging that even if I tried to reach out, no one could understand how much I desperately needed help, because I appeared to be functioning fine, even when I really wasn't. And people didn't listen to my words. And they would encourage me, saying, "You can do it," when really what I needed was validation and actual help to lessen my burdens. So let's stop there. This is a public service announcement. When somebody looks okay, but says they're not, ask them what they need, whether they are autistic or not. How you respond to someone could literally be the difference between life and death. So moving on. One good thing that came out of my struggles was getting into weekly outpatient therapy. And it was a private therapist who first suggested that I might be autistic. She wasn't a specialist in autism, but knowing that I was an excellent researcher, she told me to research the subject of autism and to see what I thought. So I got on the computer that night and read about autistic traits in adults. And they sounded exactly like my dad. So then I found another website that described how autism manifests in women. And that was the moment that everything changed. My whole worldview shifted, and suddenly it was as if I was looking at my own reflection and seeing myself not as the ugly duckling, but as a swan in a world of ducks. I came back to my therapist with my discovery and then went on to be formally diagnosed in a study through the University of Pittsburgh. And since my diagnosis, I've gradually come to understand the autistic parts of myself, both the vulnerabilities and how to use autism as a strength. But it was my diagnosis that was the major turning point. Before, I had always just tried to be normal and act like a duck. But now I realized that I needed to learn how to be a swan amongst the ducks. And it's taken time, but over the past decade or so, I've learned important strategies that I can use to take care of myself and to be that successful swan. And I've learned 3 keys to becoming a successful swan, which I will be talking about today. So the first key is awareness. And this is getting to know your true self. I spent 30 years, which was my whole life at that point, pretending to be like other people. And I had no idea who I really was. So I had to stop overriding my own emotions and figure out what I really needed, what I wanted, and what was best for me. Before, I just knew that I often felt uncomfortable in situations. But that didn't really matter because my response was always dictated by the norms of others. So the second key to success is accepting and managing the challenges related to living in a world made for and run by non-autistic ducks. Meeting expectations. People expect you to respond like a duck. And I had lots of practice in how to do that. But what if I didn't act like a duck and I showed my swanness? I had spent my whole life trying to camouflage. And now I had to learn when to camouflage and when it was safe to be authentic and to be myself. And this was kind of a coming out process. I had to be more secure in myself and in my identity and decide, situation by situation, if it's more important to go along or to stand out. And this is something I still do. And I also have to consider the possibility of breaking down autism stigma and versus not wanting to be stigmatized against. For example, I applied to work as a barista in a local coffee shop, but I had to decide, did I want to tell my potential employer that I was autistic and risk him stigmatizing against me because I'm autistic versus, potentially getting, accommodations. I didn't know. Should I tell him or not? Overwhelmed and overload. These two are similar, but yet not quite the same. I consider overwhelmed as the tendency to be overscheduled and the feeling like there's too much on my plate with no end in sight. And I manage this by planning ahead whenever possible and using the calendar on my iPad or iPhone to try to avoid scheduling appointments and activities back to back. And I know it's not a good idea to commit to too many social events in the same week. And I kind of plan ahead to ration out my social energy for the week and to make modifications if necessary. And I think this has to do with the exhaustion that I get from being around other people. I need to take regular breaks from social interaction. And I call this downtime. My brain needs time to recover. And yet, at the same time, I wrestle with myself over how much I could realistically do, because I don't want to miss out on anything. When I was working full-time, I was in a chronic state of being overwhelmed, and my mental health suffered. So I've come to learn that having adequate downtime, taking those regular breaks, is essential as food and water. Now, overload is more of an acute, in-the-moment experience. It can be sensory, emotional, social, cognitive, or empathy overload, or any combination of those. And by the way, chronically being overwhelmed makes me more vulnerable to overload. So when the little things start piling up, it can lead to the brink of meltdown, or actual meltdown. And I know I'm there when I'm getting increasingly frustrated and stuck on an issue, when I start yelling at people, or when I'm about to burst into tears over the tiniest thing. And the best solution to overload is to get out of the moment and to go somewhere alone and to lighten that load. And for me, it's also helpful to write about it because I can unload what's burdening me. Isolation. When I say isolation, I also mean loneliness, the feeling of not belonging. There could be a lot of words for this. And as I said earlier, I always felt different and like I didn't really belong or fit in. So I had to find places where I did belong, where I was accepted, where people did care about me. And I now have support through the autism community. I'm on a Dragon Boat team. I'm an aunt. I'm closer to my family. And my biggest support of all is probably the Clubhouse community. And I have people here to support me today. Around 2010, around the same time that I received my autism diagnosis, I also joined the Sally and Howard Levin Clubhouse. And they're in Squirrel Hill. The Clubhouse is part of an international psychiatric rehabilitation model for adults. And you become a member there for life. And as I said, there are some people, staff and members here to support me today. And also, well, technically not a support person, I do have to say that my cat helps me manage isolation. There is something real about emotional support animals. My 18-year-old cat, Emma, is my family. She's been with me through this entire journey. And we all have lived through COVID, and, people couldn't be within 6 feet of each other, but my cat was always there sitting on my lap. She's what got me through. Uncomfortable situations. As I've learned about autism and myself, I've discovered there are many common issues and needs among autistic people. Things like problems with noise, the need to have things written out. There's lots of things in common. And now I feel more comfortable advocating for my needs and also making changes that can benefit others. And this has really helped me feel empowered. Misunderstandings. I extend so much effort trying to avoid misunderstandings. But my brain works differently, and communication will never go right 100% of the time. But I do learn from experience. I lost that first PA job when my boss asked me if I wanted to call patients back, and I said honestly, no, not really. Well, I will never again answer honestly if a boss asks me if I want to do something. And I really don't. I now know that bosses really don't care if their employees want to do something. They're telling you to do it. Thanks, Chrissy. So now I'm learning about repair mechanisms. You should apologize for hurting people, even if you didn't intend to do it. So, I'm still learning. Frustration. Living in a world not made for you is frustrating and hard. So having a non-judgmental person on your side, someone to confide in, someone to be a constant in your ever-changing life is a godsend. And I have been blessed to have a few long-term, amazing therapists. So, this is a picture of my Clubhouse supports, and there's a QR code there. I know this slide wasn't included in your packet. So if anyone wants to take a quick picture, that will link you to the Clubhouse website. And they also have a table out in the exhibitor room. So I really am promoting Clubhouse, and I would love to talk to you more about that. But this is an autism slide, or autism speech, so I can't really talk a lot about Clubhouse. Okay. Key to success number 3, taking advantage of strengths. A swan can honk and sell Valentine's cards. I hope you got this. Obviously, a duck can quack, not honk. And have you ever seen a duck picture on a Valentine's card? You may have seen a picture of swans, like that one at the bottom with the little heart in the middle. So people often think of autistic traits as negatives, but there are also positives to autistic strengths, or to autistic traits, and they can be used as strengths. So some of my strengths are being focused, determined, noticing details, being independent, doing thorough research, being a creative thinker, being precise, sensitive, following rules, having special interests and passions, and standing up to injustice. So how are these strengths beneficial in my life? They help me become a skilled dragon boat paddler. I've done sensory-friendly consulting in my photography, in my ability to own my own home and manage finances, in my bargain shopping ability. I've been able to obtain various grants and scholarships. In my creative and practical solutions that I do, especially with pool noodles. I do have some pictures coming up. In my writing, my speaking, in being a mental health and autism advocate, and in my ability to be on Clubhouse International faculty. And I'm sure there's many more, but there wasn't a lot of room on this slide left. Okay, so here are some of my creative solutions. I've made an umbrella stand with a cooler and bricks, and there is a pool noodle in there. Let me see if I can work this. Maybe not. Yeah, okay. I made like a stroller for my cat out of a kid's stroller. I filled a swimming pool with rainwater and fixed a leak on my porch. A lot of cool things. These are just a few. One day it started to snow and it wasn't supposed to snow yet, so I grabbed some hangers and made ice scrapers for a lot of people. I think some of those people are over there. Yeah. All right. So this one's also not in your slides, but I write for a magazine called Pitverse. It's pitverse.org. It's an all autistic written magazine. The very first issue that I wrote in was summer of 2015. One of the articles I wrote was called A Beautiful Spectrum. And I also took that picture, by the way. And this is just part of the article. And I'm kind of proud of a lot of my articles, but part of the article, I'll read it to you. Each person on the autism spectrum has struggles for sure, but there are also many strengths, many beautiful aspects, and inherently each person has value for who they are. After all, aren't all the colors of the rainbow equally beautiful and important? And in fact, all of humanity is part of a larger rainbow of sorts, if you want to look at it that way. If my non-autistic brother is orange, and I am indigo, it doesn't do any good for him to try to change me into orange, because the whole rainbow still needs indigo. The rainbow needs every color, and that requires every single one of us being included with all our characteristics that make each color unique. So that has to do with autism, but also about just diversity. So in review, how to live successfully as a SWAN, or an autistic person. The first thing is awareness, being aware that you're a SWAN or autistic and you can never be a duck or non-autistic, and so you have to live as a SWAN, not a duck. accepting that there are challenges to living as a swan in a world run by ducks, and taking care of yourself and doing the best you can to mitigate the challenges. Using swan qualities as strengths to benefit yourself and others. And then celebrating life as a swan. Okay, so this is what I consider success, or one of my successes. On my 40th birthday, I had a cake with 40 candles, because in my mind, you get an extra candle for every year. So I was not going to have a 4 and a 0 candle, because my birthday cake should have the same number of candles as my age. And then these are some other pictures of what success looks like for me. And I changed a few of the pictures from what you might have in your slides. So these are some of my supports and successes. I have a picture of my Dragon Boat team at the bottom where we won medals. And there's some articles about my mental health journey, a picture of me dressed like a cat at a show that Heather, I don't know where Heather is, but that their group sponsored, where I got to sell a piece of art. At the top is a picture of my old therapist, who's now retired, and he came to a Pitverse release event. There's a picture of Brian from Pitverse, some more articles, my parents. Some other ways I define success. There's my nieces and nephews, just having fun. I tried something new. I was steering the Dragon Boat. There's me making cranberry sauce, which I'm kind of known for my cranberry sauce at the clubhouse. A group of clubhouse colleagues. I'm dressed up my cat for Christmas, and we went to see Santa. And there's me on the Clubhouse International faculty page. I do gardening, and I grew a 12-foot-tall tomato plant. I take my cat for a walk in a baby carrier. I was the dragon in a parade. There's Chrissy over there. She's dressed with me for 80s night. I gave up my lab coat so I could move on past my physician assistant. There's a picture of the sensory-friendly room that I helped consult with for the airport. Some dragon boating pictures, and there's our next speaker, Lou, over there. And a thank you for listening. Thank you. I don't know, do we do questions now? Okay. Okay.
Yes, there we go. There was an online question here. Is the clubhouse for children as well? They have an 8-year-old grandson.
No, the clubhouse is for adults.
Does anyone in the audience have a question? First of all, I want to say that if there were a lot more people in the world that embraced their swanness, it would be a lot better place.
I work with high school students on the spectrum of varying degrees, and you made a comment about being comfortable with advocating for the things that you need. How did you become comfortable with advocating? Because I'm struggling having the kids ask for what they need. How can what you've gone through help what I'm going through?
I would say it's a process, it's a journey that you have to, it doesn't just come right away. I don't know if age has to do with it or life experience has to do with it. So I can't give you a specific answer.
Did you have an aha moment?
Well, my aha moment was my diagnosis. And I had some negative life experiences before that, so I think there was a lot of clarity when that aha moment happened. So I don't know if high school students were possibly diagnosed when they were younger. I don't know if it makes a difference. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for presenting this, because getting your perspective is huge. And one of the things I'd like to hear from your perspective, I do a lot of work in the disability community, and I train people to default to person first language and then take the cue from the individuals with whom you're working. So I want to ask you, do you refer to yourself as a person with autism, or do you refer to yourself elsewise?
I refer to myself as an autistic person.
Thank you.
Rebecca, I'm in the same boat.
I'll use it anyways, just online. Yeah. Thank you for your speech today. You mentioned the employer who didn't want to hear that you didn't want to do a particular thing. What would your recommendation be to employers or people, who are offering opportunities for people with disabilities and autism in particular, on how to engage in a non-threatening and non-confrontational way with instances like you used in your example?
Well, I was not diagnosed at that time, so I guess that's a little trickier. If the employer, ideally, the employer would be trained more about autism and know about different traits and what to expect and what types of things not to be offended by. I think that would be ideal.
Can I follow up on that for a second? What do you think, or where do you think ducks can find resources to be better at acceptance and trying to do what's best?
Lou, can you jump in?
I'm coming, Lou.
I know that the Brian's group does stuff like that.
And I'll be talking in a couple minutes, but Autism Connection of Pennsylvania can link you to training. We do training for employers. We talk about things like understanding how the brain works, about how not to take things personally, about how to deliver and receive feedback, like through writing or Post-its, or like just kind of basic things, but
Yeah.
it's not basic to ducks, right? Ducks just assume everybody's a duck. So I'll talk more about that in a minute.
But specifically employer groups training. Yeah.
I think if they contact us, honestly, we
There's
can,
an
depends-
autism employment network. Yeah. That's one of them. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's fine. I'm not the specific resource for that, though.
No, I think you're amazing, by the way. Everything you said gave me chills. I'm a special education teacher, number one. I teach life skills and autistic support, and I'm also a parent of a daughter with autism. So I think you're amazing. Autism Employment Network, I have just had them facilitated. I teach at Penn Hills, but I live in Westmoreland County, and they are doing a phenomenal job, and they work with high school students and adults, both in Allegheny and Westmoreland County, and they are a wealth of knowledge. But when I heard somebody ask, I think it was you, I almost feel, and this is just me speaking, I think as a mom, I think you as your own swan walking into that employer can make your own list of things about yourself and educate, like when you go for your interview, almost part of your resume, just hand that to them and say, this is a little bit about me, like with your cover letter type of thing or something, because everybody's, even though you're diagnosed with autism, everybody's different. So I think that might be something that needs to be a part of the interviewing packet of paperwork, because you're going to be different than my daughter per se. But
Right.
yeah.
Everyone has their own needs.
Yeah, and I thought that was an excellent question. Thank you.
I thought I saw a hand over on this side.
Hi. I really don't have a question, Elaine. What I want to say is that when you talk about your journey and your progress, I haven't been there for your whole journey at Clubhouse. Maybe I've been there 5 years, and the amazing progression I have seen from that point at 5 years ago to now, I see you walking into your swanness and walking with your swanness. That's exciting for me and appreciative, and I just want to say thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, looks like we have one more question back here. Is this the last question, Patty? Is this the last question? Okay.
This is more of a comment than a question, but the question's about where to get training. So that's one of the things that I try to do, is go into organizations, and that's why I asked you the question that I did, and I train other people. Like, this is the default, but always ask. But I think the example that you gave about the employer, they asked a question and you gave an honest response, and I think the training has to go to, and Lou mentioned about how to give and receive feedback. It's being literal. Don't use figurative language and assume somebody knows what you intend. Use literal language, and that way it's less open to interpretation, because you were asked a question and you answered it honestly, and like you said, you had to learn. Your boss didn't really care if
Right.
you wanted to do it.
Right. And that was my very first job, like out of college, my first professional job too.
Part of the learning curve for employers would be don't beat around the bush. He asked you a question. Why did he ask you? He should have told you to call these
Right.
patients instead of saying, do you want to? That's an NT way of talking that we don't get.
I have a question over here.
So, excuse me, I have quite the frog this morning. That's one of the things, I have an interest somewhat in linguistics, and that is actually referred to as the Pittsburgh request. So in this geographic area, families, individuals, they will ask you if you want to do something, but it's not actually a request, it is a directive. And that is something that needs to be clarified. Is, again, you take it literally from a person who is in charge, and there could be a problem. But if you understand this area, it's a directive. But they should know better. Give a directive. Don't ask. So that goes to what you were saying, and opening their minds up to how you are presenting.
Interestingly, this was in Erie, and the boss was originally from New York.
Well, I'm sorry.
So
they
it
refer
must
to it
be-
as the Pittsburgh request, but it's to the East Coast.
Yeah,
like this
it must be
ge-
more than just Pittsburgh.
Yeah, it is. I should say, there was an article not too long ago that referred to it as the Pittsburgh Directive. But yeah, it is particular to the East, the Northeast area. So, yeah.
It's people trying to be polite sometimes when in essence they're offending.
Yeah.
So you mentioned your job as a barista and whether or not you would be open about your diagnosis. What did you end up deciding? Were you open about it?
So I didn't tell him. So this was also like a very independent coffee shop. Like it was the boss, and like he owned the coffee shop. So I did not tell him originally, like when he hired me. Later on, I did tell him.
Okay. So
I didn't think it would. So part of it also was I didn't think it would like affect my performance or like my job responsibilities originally. But I did later on, he wanted me to like work irregular hours and like more frequently. And so like I didn't want to change my hours, and I didn't want to work more than 8 hours a week. So whenever he started asking me that, that's when I said, you know what, I'm autistic and I need to limit my hours and have time off days in between. And so that's when I brought it up. And then when I was doing really well, he wanted to like promote me to like more responsibilities and like, hey, do you want to be my assistant manager? And I was like, no, I can't do that.
So knowing more now and embracing your swanness, do you think going into an interview you would be open about that, or would you?
Again, it would depend. I think it would depend on the actual situation.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're good. Great information. Thank you.